that agenda items 5 and 6 are recorded by Hansard. Any apologies?
Deputy Chair and Edith Cochrane and also Martina Millier likely to be involved.
Okay. Draft minutes, pages 5 to 8. Members content their accurate record. Read. Matters arising. Table of requests are at pages 10 to 13 of your packs for noting. Also, on foot of yesterday's debate, can I seek agreement to write to the other committees, encourage them to prioritise follow-up scrutiny of sickness absence at departmental sectoral level?
Right, Chair.
Right.
I think that'd be useful. I wonder, just in terms of whatever the letter goes out, maybe if there's maybe a particular line added in. I mean, obviously, two areas that were particularly noted outside of civil service generally were obviously education and health. So I don't know if there's maybe just some additional line we put in when writing to those two committees on it, because obviously there's very specific recommendations as regards that, and obviously the scale and those are quite large.
Okay, members agreed? Matters arising. Okay, members, can I refer you to the research paper on a comparative perspective on public procurement requirements, social, environmental and economic, pages 15 to 40 of your packs. Can I advise you, due to unforeseen circumstances, the researcher is not in a position to brief the committee on the research paper today. Can I therefore seek agreement to note the paper and to reschedule the briefing to a later date in the work programme, and also seek agreement to send it to the department in the meantime for comment on the issues raised in the paper? Members agreed?
Great.
Moving on then to the report on air connectivity. Can I refer members to the following documents? Pages 42 to 108 is the Ulster University research paper on air connectivity and APD. Also, at your tabled papers this morning, there's a submission from the City of Derry Airport at page 4 of your tabled papers, and also from George Best City Airport at page 8 of your tabled papers. So can I welcome the witnesses to the table for this session? Miss Katie Best is the Commercial and Marketing Director of George Best Belfast City Airport. Mr Graham Ketty is the Managing Director of Belfast International Airport. And Mr Albert Harrison is the Non-Executive Director, CODA Operations Limited, City of Derry Airport. You're all very welcome to the committee this morning. Do some of you want to make any opening comments before we go to questions?
If that's possible, Mr Chairman. I'd just like to thank you for the information and for the invitation today. I'd like to start off. APD is a regressive tax. The Republic of Ireland has recognised the harm it does and has got rid of it. The Netherlands did the same. Scotland wants the power devolved so it can reduce it by half and then get rid of it. Wales wants to follow suit. I'm afraid in Northern Ireland we're out of step. We're the only region that is content to have the matter addressed at national level. There seems to be an apprehension that the block grant will be impacted. And as to support its reluctance to get the power devolved, the report from NICET was commissioned by the DFP and Betty, and it seems to support the thesis that the cost would outweigh the benefits. It's claimed to be a £55 million tax shortfall. As I say, needless to say, we disagree with these findings. We consider them superficial, inaccurate, wholly inadequate for the full debate that we feel is required in this matter. In response as BIA, we have commissioned international consultants. Mark MacDonald, I've got a copy of the report. We've submitted it to the clerk. I'm afraid I do apologise, it was last night, but it was late coming in from our consultants. And from Mark MacDonald, basically critiquing the NICET work. It has to be said, the analysis basically blows the NICET report out of the water. It shows it's flawed and unreliable. Consultants have found there are large positive net economic benefits to doing away with EPD. For us, we must get the ministers to relook at this again as a potential for the economy in Northern Ireland. At best, the study should be looked at seriously from, it's from one of the top aviation consultancies in the world. Mark MacDonald had basically said, if APD is removed, It supports 3,800 jobs, additional jobs, and another £200 million in gross value added. Mark MacDonald found the NICET report used outdated data, contained calculation errors, delivered unreasonable, unexplained or unsupported assumptions, and that instead of delivering a small benefit, Mark MacDonald says a reduction in APD would be a large positive net economic benefit. We shouldn't run away and hide from securing the APD devolved power. Instead, it's seen as a cost on the block grant, and we should be courageous enough to view this as a key to unlocking huge economic potential. Unfortunately, we're handling our competitors' revenue, jobs and economic success on a plate. And with international connectivity is crucial to our economy going forward. We have an opportunity here to follow the Irish experience and what the Scottish Government is determined to achieve. We should grasp it with both hands and move properly and sensibly to exploit a sector for too long has been overlooked. Thank you very much for allowing me to make that opening statement.
The name of the rest, you want to make any comments?
If I may, Chairperson, I think just in following up to Graham's points, I think it's important that we have an element of perspective in terms of why air traffic is so significant to us as a region. We very much rely on air travel for both business and tourism in Northern Ireland. As an island off an island, we have to fly to conduct business, generate FDI and trade, attract inbound tourism and enjoy outbound tourism opportunities. The Northern Ireland Executive is very much targeting increased levels of FDI, exports, R&D and investment spending, and access to key markets is essential to do this. 31% of all the exports in Northern Ireland go by air, with a total value of £1 billion. Manufacturing companies are particularly reliant on these markets for their success, with nearly 80% of all sales from Northern Ireland manufacturing companies being to companies outside the region. From a tourism perspective, 1 in every 18 jobs in Northern Ireland is supported by the tourism economy. That's nearly 5% of the Northern Ireland GVA. And direct air access is vital to grow this industry and to allow visitors to spend money in Northern Ireland. It has been proven that to grow tourism revenue, direct access is key and directly correlates. If business and tourism is to grow, it's vital that we grow air connectivity. The status quo in terms of the APD situation means that Northern Ireland is at a disadvantage when it comes to business connectivity. It adds cost to doing business in Northern Ireland and it stifles inbound tourism potential. It should be noted that recent figures released by the Airport Councils International, ACI Europe, have shown that for every 10% increase in air access, GDP per capita increases by 0.5%. That's a substantial figure. In addition to the NICEP findings, we are encouraged by the report that was produced by the Committee for Culture, Media and Sport, published in March, which indicated that abolishing APD could boost the UK GDP by 0.46% in its first year and amounting to a £16 billion of revenue injection in the first 3 years. If we wish to accelerate the process of air route development, as is crucial to taking this economy forward, Belfast City Airport would be supported with a twin-track approach in conjunction with government. The first thing we would call for is the immediate creation of an air route development fund to help secure new international routes for as soon as 2016, and we welcome the opportunity to engage on this subject. And secondly, an engagement of the airports and airlines with the Executive to review the taxation issue, which is stifling passenger growth within this region. It's important that the position of the Northern Ireland Executive is not considered in a vacuum. And you've heard what Graham has had to say in terms of APD devolution is being considered across England, Scotland and Wales. And without devolution, Northern Ireland would not be able to control the decisions made regarding APD within this region, and hence could become uncompetitive within the UK as well as with ROI. Furthermore, we must consider the risk of further increases in APD, which would have a damaging effect in an already difficult air route development environment. Belfast City Airport welcomes the opportunity to engage on these issues with the relevant personnel in DFP and DETI. Thank you.
Albert, do you want to add anything?
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to you this morning. City of Derry Airport, we're pleased to hear that the report was being produced. We operate in a very price-sensitive market. We do not have a level playing field in Ireland. Our friends in the south have no airport departure tax. Ryanair stated if the government got rid of airport departure tax, they would pump an additional 1 million seats into the market, and this they have done. And you can actually see the increase in passenger numbers in Dublin Airport. I think numbers have increased down there by 47% in the last year. We are in a situation where the price sensitivity is such that Ryanair have stated to us that unless airport departure tax goes, or they are compensated for it, they will not operate any more flights out of City of Derry Airport. Bland statement. In addition, we have been faced, all three airports, with substantial rate increases over the last 2 years. We've seen our rate increase of 2.4 factor. I think Belfast International is something similar. So our ability to go out and actually compete and bring airlines to Northern Ireland is being affected by airport departure tax and the increase in our cost base. The report itself we find flawed. There are several things that are wrong with the report. They use consistently pessimistic assumptions without reason. There was a health warning over the data sources. They always use the downside. The jobs per million passengers is inaccurate. They're quoting 400 PAX, 400 staff per million passengers. Brian Ambrose quoted in Business First magazine, February 2015, that 1,600 employees at Belfast City Airport do their best to make it a pleasant experience going through the facility. The report has it 1,000 passengers. So they can't even get simple facts like that correct. They have grossly underestimated the number of people going to Dublin. And that's people who are going, and for every, we believe it's about 800 jobs per million passengers. At the moment, there's probably 1.5 million, 2 million people from Northern Ireland going to the south. How much would they assembly invest to try and create 2,000 jobs in Northern Ireland? A lot. Airport departure tax needs to be looked at. We believe there are 4 things need to be done right now. 1, we should have a look to see if airport departure tax could be devolved to Northern Ireland. That sort of thing takes time. The Scots are going to do it. As soon as they get it, they will reduce APD by 50% in the first year. So get it devolved. Resolve the issue with Treasury as to exactly what the amount is that the Treasury bring in on APD. Is it 55 million? Is it 75 million? There is a mismatch. Third thing is then we need to sit down and have a look at an air route development fund as soon as possible. We would support it. I was involved with Belfast International whenever we introduced the last route development fund, and it was a success, and that was only £4 million. So for £4 million investment, we got New York and a raft of destinations across Europe and the UK. We'd be more than happy to sit down and talk with the relevant departments, similar to Belfast City, to actually go through all the mistakes in the report and have them corrected so that the Assembly can have a document that all the airports and the industry, tourism industry in Northern Ireland agree with. At the moment, none of us agree with it. Thank you.
Thank you. I certainly get a sense that in terms of the EU report, that it's been pretty much rubbished by yourselves in terms of the conclusions found. So I would be keen, I'm sure other members are keen to delve down into the detail of that. But I suppose, and I recall there was a report done a couple of years ago by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I always remember the comment made then that in their view they felt that APD, in terms of its economic impact, would possibly have more potential to improve the economy than corporation tax, and always stuck in my mind that particular comment. Is that something that you would agree with? And how urgent is this situation now in terms of the risk to yourselves, in terms of businesses, and indeed the tourism sector? I mean, 1 in 18 jobs in the north is a significant figure, certainly from a constituency like Northampton. I know the benefit of tourism to the economy. So how serious a situation is this?
If you don't mind, it's pretty serious. If you look at our growth, has been relatively flat over the last 3 or 4 years. Airlines are crucial to our development. If you look at from a point of view of Germany, the world's largest outbound tourist market, we have 0 flights from Northern Ireland, and from Dublin alone there's 128 a week. It is crucial for us to grow our tourism economy. The 3 of us here have over 6,000 people working on our sites. We're a major part of the economy. We need to grow that economy and to balance it. Unless APD is a huge weight behind us. The PwC report, I think, recommended 60,000 jobs almost straight away by getting rid of it. This was an organisation who initially were against APD. Once they did the study, it came through very effectively. And all we need to do is look at the Republic of Ireland. The growth in passengers, tourism, because they've got rid of APD, because they've dropped hospitality tax, and the impact that's had on the economy has been enormous.
If I may, Chairperson, I would add that one of the reasons why APD is specifically of concern to us here in Northern Ireland is because for the vast majority of business and for the vast majority of our tourists in Northern Ireland, we depend upon the UK market. You pay APD in both directions if you are travelling from Northern Ireland to anywhere in the UK. For anybody else travelling around the UK, they have options of road and rail. For anybody who is travelling to the Republic of Ireland, they don't pay APD in 2 different directions. So this has a very significant impact on the cost of a domestic flight, and that can only have repercussions in terms of the willingness of people to travel here for business and the willingness of people to visit Northern Ireland for a short break.
If you look at there's a report, sorry, but it sounds like 3 Musketeers. If you look at the House of Commons Transport Select Committee on smaller airports, i.e. airports under 5 million people, it was published in March of this year. Basically, they said that APD was a threat to small airports across the UK, and that Northern Ireland, in respect of APD, should be treated as a special case due to the land border with Southern Ireland, because there is not a level playing field. So it is critically important that we do something on it quickly.
And just in terms of the figures that you referred to earlier, Albert, I mean, 47% increase in numbers in Dublin in the past year.
Yep.
Is that Dublin or the south?
Northern Ireland.
So,
It's from Northern Ireland, sorry, make sure about that. It's traffic from Northern Ireland. They've seen an increase in the number of people going from Northern Ireland to the south by 47%.
and what is the...
Dublin Airport is growing by...
As Dublin Airport grew its passenger numbers for the first 6 months in 2014 from Northern Ireland by 47%.
But the growth of Dublin itself, double digit? 5%.
So I presume there'll be a corresponding significant decrease in terms of the 3 airports in the north too, in terms of, you know, so...
Our growth rates are behind that of the UK mainland, so essentially growth rates are relatively flat.
Yeah, our numbers are going down next year.
Okay, Peter?
Thank you. I presume just on that last point, I appreciate that it's a negative impact. It's not, I suppose, the growth in Dublin isn't directly just reducing, if you like, here. It's the fact actually that people are taking opportunities which are there, which aren't here. You mentioned about, I think, for example, I may well be heading to Germany some stage in a couple of months' time, the option of going to Germany is basically no other option but to go through Dublin in that regard. So in one sense, it's more of an opportunity cost, I suppose, really, rather than a direct reduction in that sense on it, but it's an opportunity cost nonetheless for yourselves. Can I ask just a couple of questions on it? I mean, I appreciate, one thing, I mean, it's very useful we've got now the new report. Obviously, we've just physically received this, so it will be difficult for us to directly digest figures. Can I ask you just a couple of questions? First of all, you mentioned about the Air Route Development Fund as one of the things you would be looking for. Just to give an idea, I know Albert mentioned about a previous exercise with about £4 million on it, but do you have in mind what you would see as a sort of the scale in terms of the financing of we're talking about for 2016-17 of an Air Route Development Fund as to what level you're talking about just?
I think I was quoted as saying £20 million. It's difficult to gauge until you actually sit down and think about it, because support levels, because of the damage on APD, and if I'll stand back a bit, if you look at domestically, domestic traffic to GB, and if you compare our traffic to Dublin's GB traffic, it's about 7 million to 5 million if you include all three airports. So it's reasonably close, because there's no real choice, we have to go across. It's our main market. Internationally, European short haul, it's 11 to 1. So they're 11 million, we're 1 million. And that's where you can see where the damage is.
Would you say sort of at the European short haul being sort of the key area target?
Yeah.
Again, I appreciate to some extent it's a little bit of a ballpark. You're not going to figure a little bit out of the air in terms of 20 million, but if you're talking about 20 million, you're talking about per year, is that over a period of years or what way? Routes, when they start off, the first 3 years are obviously the most critical years. The first 2 years are so you have to spread it at least over some period of time to support a route to get it established and get it running. The other issue we're probably facing, and Albert would agree with me, it's a very much changed environment. Everybody's competing for those airlines. Every airport, every community within Europe is chasing airlines with money in their pockets. And just from that point of view, and maybe to some extent you've slightly answered the next question. And from that point of view, I mean, if, for instance, the executive was to go down that as a route of a fund, would there be any difficulties in terms of the handling of that to ensure it didn't fall foul of any European law in relation to that, in terms of from a competition law point of view?
If I may, Mr. Weir, I would take that, and I suppose just to follow up with Graham's point and to give you some perspective on what it is, the economics of starting a new route for an airline. Typically, an airline will lose about £1 million in the first year of operation if you were looking at a service from Northern Ireland to mainland Europe with decent frequency. What you hear time and again from airlines is that there are regional governments across Europe who are willing to de-risk that situation by funding and providing support for a new route. So there are many examples across Europe where funding has been provided and where regions have demonstrated that they understand that air access is an economic driver by stepping in and de-risking the first year or several years of operation for an airline.
Just so you can decode that in terms of de-risking, what are you talking about specifically?
Providing route development funding.
And from that point of view, I mean, it would be, I suppose if we're following a similar model, we would feel reasonably secure in that regard. And, you know, just I appreciate sometimes with Europe, there can be, I suppose, sometimes different attitudes taken to what is essentially state aid in terms of competition in that regard on it. Now, I have to say, what is maybe happening already sounds like in other parts of Europe fairly close to a form of state aid, but I suppose if we're replicating that, then probably minimises the risk from our point of view on that side.
Well, it's something that the Department for Transport in Westminster have looked at very closely the last number of years, and in fact launched an air route development fund for the whole of the UK earlier this year.
Okay. Sorry, Albert.
Chair, a couple of points. If you actually look at our ambitions across the three airports, it's not a huge number of destinations that we want. We're not looking for an additional 20 airports to fly to in the next 2 years. It would be nice, but one has to be realistic. There are very few airlines and lots of airports, so everybody's competing for very few assets. We would probably in Derry be looking at a Manchester, because we really do need a direct flight into Manchester to help us connect onwards to the Far East, especially for business. Possibly Edinburgh, possibly Newcastle. That's the limit of Derry's ambitions at the moment. I can't actually see KLM coming to Derry to actually fly into Amsterdam. That's not going to happen. For these guys, yeah, Europe is the thing. For Graham, long haul as well is a strong possibility. But we're not talking about a huge range of destinations. So the amount of money that we can get, EU legislation tends to restrict you to 50% of all your airport charges. Certain nations seem to get round it in various means. The Welsh government have given a loan to the airport, Knock Airport. Totally beyond me how they managed to grow the way they have been. So people find ways and means round it. We follow the rules, and we would be restricted to 50% of the airport charges. In terms of grant numbers, possibly 4 million a year for 3 or 4 years. Would go a long way in my opinion.
What I would suggest, and maybe just more of a bit of advice. I think there's a good case to be made. It's together. I mean, clearly as part of that, you need to develop a business case, because I suppose with respect, Graham's plucked a figure out of 20 million euros, talked about 4 million over 3 or 4 years. It does strike me that
That's right. 3 or 4 million a year for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, still that's potentially could be about 9 or 10 million or 12 million, or it could be 20 million. I'm just saying, I just think if you're going to have something, I think you need to probably develop something a wee bit more precise in that regard. Maybe more by way of advice on that, but because I think in tight economic times, it's probably something that needs to be tied down a little bit.
Well, I mean, I can give a number for City of Derry Airport that would do us. The number I'm giving would be a guesstimate for the 3 airports.
I could play devil's advocate, Albert. You may take this wrongly.
Oh, no,
I was going to say, are 3 airports in Northern Ireland sustainable?
Oh no! I'm somewhat unique in that I've actually managed all 3 airports. I worked for an airline in Hong Kong, as we worked for the same airline, funny enough. And then I came back and I ran Belfast City for a couple of years, and I joined TBI. I ran a few airports around the world, and then I ran Belfast International, and then I ran 10 airports for a short time, and then I ran City of Derry Airport for a while when I retired to help them out. So I can actually look at sort of the Northern Ireland thing as a unique perspective. If you were starting with a clean sheet of paper, I think we would all agree you'd have one airport for Northern Ireland. We don't. We are where we are. We've each got shareholders.
A little bit off topic in that regard.
I know.
Can I just ask you one final question? We've had, I suppose, there's also the issue of the devolution of APD. There's also the issue of indicated in terms of the wider economic studies which have shown that it's damaging to the whole UK economy in that regard. What would be the impact of an abolition across the UK as opposed to simply devolution of it? Would you then achieve the same impact, or is there a particular advantage simply to the devolution? I appreciate it may not necessarily be a choice in that regard, but just
I think it's a political choice. The regions of the UK are more dependent on connectivity. Connectivity already exists in the southeast of England. If you look at the dominance, if you look at the drivers of the southeast of England, and all that's happening, it's acting like a giant sponge, and it's just soaking up everything from the regions. The regions need those connectivity. It would be fantastic if the UK got rid of it nationally. It would suit us all. But if you see what's happening with the Scots, if you look at our fellow airport management teams in the north of England, are in somewhat of a panic because they can see what's going to happen when the Scots get the APD. So places like Newcastle, Manchester, Leeds, Bradford, Liverpool are in the ears of their MPs and their politicians saying this is going to cost jobs because a lot of the flights will just move north of the border.
Yes. Although I suppose, to be fair, sometimes promises and delivery can be 2 different things in that regard on it.
I think the Scots, I think it's in the Smith report already.
No, I appreciate. There's a difference between getting the power to do something, and I think there would be a concern, shall we say, that some of the economic plans for Scotland maybe questionable how deliverable they are, but that's maybe a separate issue. No?
But I would say Alex Salmond has stood up publicly on a number of occasions and say he'll cut it in half straight away. And
Ever disbelieve a pledge until it's made publicly?
yeah,
Even then, take it with a pinch of salt.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. That's useful.
Hey, John?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentations. I mean, both following on from Peter, and I'd be someone that would like to see Northern Ireland as a whole looking or having a commission to look at what taxes we might devolve, what's most appropriate. And living where I live, only between Banbridge and Newry, only a few miles off the main A1, you know, Dublin is a very easy. Dublin Airport's a very easy commute, and when you throw out figures like what was it, 120 or 130 flights to Germany, and we've none, you know, that's pretty shocking actually when you hear it like that, and the sheer growth. Also, the interesting point about paying the tax on both directions. You know, I think, you know, on the state that we are even handicapping ourselves and the national government, the fact that if I go to Dublin and fly to London, I pay it one way, but if I go to Belfast and fly to London, I'm paying in both directions, I think is pretty shocking way to do it. I mean, there is a big difference between, and my concern, I suppose, about always devolving tax-bearing powers ends up being a political one, that whether you would devolve it into anything more into this assembly without fairly radical changes to it. And I don't expect you to comment on reforming the Northern Ireland Assembly. But that impact on jobs, I think, is worth reinforcing, that if you have around 800 jobs per million passengers, and that we have 1.5 to 2 million people going south, that's a phenomenal rate of jobs and rate of growth. From any, I mean, do you see from regional airports, effectively there is no advantage to this tax? Is there any? I mean, I think was originally brought in more for environmental reasons, or broadly just to raise money?
if I can explain, it was brought in primarily for environmental reasons, and the Treasury saw it as a very good tax take. The original tax take was £300 million a year. By 2017, it will be at 3.9 billion.
It's gone into a very considerable tax take, but then your argument is that we are seriously disadvantaged. We have both that, and then in tourist terms, then of course different rates of VAT on tourism and hospitality, which is, I suppose broadly the point is, in devolving this, it is where, and this Assembly shown no willingness to look at where the better places to raise money, or where you would want to save it, or where you would take the chance on saying we're going to cut this and we're just going to repay us in economic growth. I mean, the Chair's point, and I say, pardon me, I've forgotten who you were quoting, but the point the point that you were making, that you might have a bigger impact with this than corporation tax, I think is a huge one to be doing. And that's why the argument I would like to see is really going down the road of having a commission to look at all the tax-bearing powers that you might want to have in Northern Ireland, and this including this.
Chair, if I may a comment in response, Mr McAllister. One of the things that was a key driver in the Republic of Ireland in terms of the abolition of the tax was that there was a commitment from the airline industry that there would be new route development if the tax were to be abolished. And that commitment came through, and you would have had the likes of Ryanair and Aer Lingus and other airlines who all have seen that as an opportunity and had made that commitment to start new routes. So it had a very direct impact in terms of economic gain. And certainly I believe that that's something that should be looked at much more closely in terms of whether or not that could be an opportunity for Northern Ireland.
I take that. And city and international airports' main target is going to be continental Europe to develop that, and Derry is primarily
Into Britain.
into Britain, the north of England, other regional airports, and more work would have to be done. But I think the two together, when you would develop looking at how you might evolve other taxes too, Northern Ireland, and caveated with Peter's point that it doesn't necessarily mean that the Northern Ireland Executive would decide to cut it, or it may not be able to cut it as far as you would like to see, but would have to go with significant route development.
So, Gaz, if I just sort of following on from Katie, is one of the disadvantages of APD is that the benefits are all around VAT, national insurance and income tax contributions, which all go to the Treasury in London. So that's where the main growth is. And if you look at it from that point of view, it's essentially about jobs growth, but it's also about bringing in tourists and spend in your local market. It's about businesses being able to be effective because they can travel out of their home bases rather than having to travel some distance. The other interesting one, which everybody forgets, is that the outbound travel actually creates jobs as well. And without that outbound travel, we wouldn't be having, we have Flybe with based aircraft, we have Jet2, we have EasyJet, we have Aer Lingus. Based in our cities, we have with crews, engineers, ground staff, all employed here. Our airports all employ a range of people, from guys that clean it to managing directors. And I think this is what's crucial. If you look at it, we have, as Belfast International, over 200 companies on our site. I'm not sure how many is in George Best or in Coda, but those are the sort of development areas that we have. We're amongst the largest site employers in Northern Ireland. And we employ thousands on our sites. And I think this has to be recognised. Those job numbers are enormous. We can grow those job numbers relatively easily and relatively quickly if we get air routes in and we can continue to grow.
I'll just add on that, congratulate you on doing the stuff around the modern apprenticeships. I think that's the sort of stuff we need to see more of. And I know from, I mean, the South Downs, the constituency I represented, it's a huge factory in it that makes seats for airlines. They bring huge numbers of people in from around the world, and actually getting to it, you know, hosting the Irish Open in a few weeks' time, hopefully bringing huge numbers in. So I get set buying into that. I just come back to the bit that it needs to be, I probably need to set in with looking at what we really look, much more like the Scots and the Welsh have done, over an overall package of what we devolve and what we do.
Sir, Mr. McAllister, if we're actually going to make decisions, we actually need to make sure that our facts are right. Yes. And I think that you can sense from this side of the table that, you know, the facts in this report we do not believe. So the report needs to be really rethought. Make sure that it's right, and then you can actually make decisions on good information rather than false information.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Killa?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I just want to make a comment, I suppose, Chair, just in relation to, and I make no apologies for being parochial, being an elected rep in the Northwest.
You're getting your point, Strabane.
Oh, well, that could be possible. Just, Albert, I'm sure it'll come to no surprise to you that this was an issue last year on the doorsteps whenever we were canvassing in terms of the council elections. And it has come up this year, being now that Strabane has moved into the Derry's City Council area, and we are now shareholder of the airport in Derry, so there was obviously issues in relation to the financial support going to Derry City, which I fully support. But obviously that people on the doors were saying, you know, because of the drop in the euro, they are swaying more towards Dublin and the other airports. So we have inherited an airport that we can't actually use. So APD has come up with the doors whenever we are, in terms of the Derry City Airport. So there's issues are there. But obviously, just in terms of the report, there was no input. Was there no input from the airports when this report was being devised? What little love or none? None at all? No?
Well, no, there was a briefing in terms of from DETI as well as DFP with regards to the commissioning of it.
Right, okay. Just wanted to... just in terms of it, I mean, one of you, I think it was yourself, Graham, mentioned that it is a serious situation. And I believe it is a serious situation, particularly for us in the Northwest, because if we're not able to use our airport, then we lose it, and that's the situation. And people see that as a crisis in the Northwest at the minute. So it's just a comment I wanted to make, Chair. Thank you.
Chair, just so that are aware, I mean, it's not all bad news at City Derry Airport. In the last 5 years, the financial results have improved every year over the last 5 years. Despite level traffic, we're probably, touch wood, going to have our lowest loss in this financial year ending. And we do produce a positive GVA for the region of £7 million. So it's not all bad news.
Thanks, Chair. Well, just on your point about the facts on the report, I think it's important that, whenever we do get a report, the facts are correct and we can make an informed decision then on that report. And I would encourage the department to engage with you and make sure you can iron out those differences and get some sort of agreement. I just asked you about the APD on the long haul. Whenever it was at the crucial end and whenever things was looking very, very bad and poorly, what was the worst results there at that time and how has it recovered since the APD has been reduced?
If you look at, we've kept the United flight going. Of the original 10 United routes that were started throughout Europe, I think we're the only one remaining of those United routes. So we've held it in there, and they took an issue in earlier this year, and they cut it for 9 weeks. They brought it back. It's coming on strong. The estimate from our friends in United that it will be very profitable this year. So there's real positivity. The long haul routes again is that we're talking to a number of carriers. Talk is cheap, and these days, as Katie so eloquently put, there's a number of regions throughout Europe who are throwing money at the likes of Etihad, Emirates, Qatar, Turkish Airlines, etc. WestJet from Canada, Air Transat, that we can't compete with. And this is where there's almost I would suggest throughout the rest of Europe, it's better to beg for forgiveness than to ask for permission.
But what I really want to focus in on is how the flight is airing out at the minute. Whenever it was at its lowest ebb, the figures had reduced, people were using it, but we abolished an APD, actually figures have risen there.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
We would have lost that flight.
Yeah. But you've managed to keep it, and it has grown since.
If we still had APD, we would have lost it. Fundamentally, George Osborne basically made that final decision and made his officials deliver it.
That's fair enough, too. Thanks.
Leslie?
Yeah, there's no doubt that air passenger duty did start as a green tax, but it's certainly developed and now a major fundraiser. My own view is that the Highlands and Islands example should have applied here. Obviously that's still the case in Scotland where they have that advantage. There were also examples in Europe, I remember, I think I was on the Enterprise Committee at that time, where the Netherlands and Belgium had APD and then scrubbed it.
Yes, Netherlands. Yes.
Have you, and I haven't obviously read this report all yet, just haven't got it, but is there any reference there to what happened in the European experience?
To give you an example, in the Netherlands, they had APD, quite high. People were just driving across the border to Germany, Belgium or France to pick up flights. So you saw the regional airports, the likes of Eindhoven and Maastricht, absolutely imploding because people would just drive across. I mean, the guys like Ryanair, EasyJet, etc., just made sure they moved outside those areas. and people were driving across international borders to save the tax. And it's the same situation that we face here, where you can just drive across a border. Tax changes.
Example, yeah. Well, did those governments, respective governments, then absorb the duty themselves, or did they simply scratch it?
They just got rid of it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Stopped it.
Just on a slightly different subject, but obviously it's germane to this. Have any of the airports considered the use of financial transactions capitals for development in the future? Have you ever heard of it even?
I've heard of it. It's the sort of thing that we wouldn't use unless you're building it for terminals or whatever, for infrastructure.
It's infrastructure.
It's infrastructure.
Yes, my understanding.
I've heard of it. No, just conducting a bit of market research here for myself.
We would use it. We would only use something like that for infrastructure, and we've got our own internal funding anyway, so we would be able to borrow.
It's going to be an increasing form of capital that's available.
But capital for me is for infrastructure. It's not for funding air routes.
No, it's for infrastructure. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Just in terms of the department's report itself, on page 59 of the report, they make the point that, and I quote, "The optimum solution appears to be a partial reduction in APD rather than a complete abolition, because the first 50% of a reduction achieves a greater number of additional passengers that the second reduction would make." Any particular views on that point that's been made in the report?
If you look at it, there's no actual. If you look at the figures, and we've rejigged the figures with NICEP figures from Mott MacDonald, it shows you that if you get rid of it, it actually starts improving the more you go forward. So it may in the short term be better off economically, but longer term, if you actually redo the numbers and you increase the number of jobs, etc., then that has a dramatic change to it.
And that's based on their conclusions, based on inaccurate conclusions. In the first case, whenever it comes to passenger growth, the number of people going to Dublin and the number of jobs per million passengers. So, come to a conclusion based on a series of things that are inaccurate.
Yeah, I was just going to come to that point, Albert. In your submission, you refer to applying a ratio of 400 jobs per 1 million passengers, and the universally accepted ratio has been 1,000 for one MPPA. Where does the universally accepted ratio originate from, and what credibility does that have?
There's a range of the EU at one stage were using 986 jobs per million passengers. The ACI Europe have come out with a report between 850 and 1,200 jobs per million. If you even look at the figures that Albert's quoted, 1,600 and George Best is 640, I think, is the calculation. We're 1,000 per million passengers. So it's very dependent on. You can see where the ratio is going. Mm-hmm. So 400 is right at the bottom end of any range.
Chair, if I may, one additional comment. When we're talking about the economic benefits, we need to remember that there are two. One, that we become more competitive as a region in terms of the price that it costs to travel in and out of Northern Ireland. But secondly, and you've heard some of this already this morning, when we are trying to attract new airlines to a region like Northern Ireland, we hear it time and time again, APD is a barrier to airlines starting in Northern Ireland. We cannot improve direct air access when we have APD in place and other European airports don't have what is essentially the first obstacle to an airline being profitable.
Just in conclusion then, I mean, Leslie's already referred to the fact, that APD is a very handy tax for Treasury to raise revenue from, and a lot of people have probably forgotten it was an environmental tax in the first place. But I suppose there's the options there. Do we wait and see if Westminster are going to make the right decision, or are you saying now that it's better to be in the hands of local politicians? Scotland's moving ahead in terms of trying to get the evolution of these powers to Edinburgh. Can we afford to take the risk that Westminster will make the right decision?
David Cameron's already talking about, I think, the Carlisle principle. However, if you look at the issues that we've already faced with the Republic, when we have Scotland less than us, the airlines will obviously look at Edinburgh, Glasgow and Aberdeen as points to operate from. Just to follow on from what Katie said, if you look at £13 on a domestic seat, the average revenue for EasyJet on a seat is £68. So 20% of a fare is tax. Now, if we don't devolve it, we're in a situation where the economic triggers to grow jobs and grow tourism are lost in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland PLC will suffer. Our businesses will fight for every revenue passenger we can get, every airline we can get. But it still stops us, and I think it would be fair. Katie and I were both in Aberdeen at a Roots conference talking to airlines, and we both got the same mantra: £13 APD, £13 APD. Dublin doesn't have it, Shannon doesn't have it, Cork doesn't have it, Knock doesn't have it, Kerry doesn't have it.
Okay, well, on that grim note, we'll close. Thank you all very much. It's been a very interesting session.
You just write your elected rep. It's all right. All right. I suppose.
Okay, members, moving on to the next session, can I refer to the Association of British Travel Agents documentation, pages 110 to 115 of your packs, and also the submission from tourism representatives at page 11 of your tabled papers. So can I welcome the witnesses to the table. Today we have Mr Jerry Lennon, the Chief Executive of Belfast Visitor and Convention Bureau, Ms Janice Galt, the Chief Executive of the NI Hotels Federation, and Ms Doreen McKenzie, the Chairperson of Aviation Committee, ABTA, the Travel Association. You're all very welcome this morning to the committee. Do some of you want to make some opening comments to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm easy, ladies. Ladies first.
I'll maybe start because being the local employer here, I could probably start. I'm Doreen McKenzie and I'm the owner of Knock Travel, which I founded in 1990. We employ 19 local staff and have an annual turnover in excess of 7 million. We operate in the corporate and leisure markets, selling flights and holidays. The provision of quality, efficient and competitively priced air travel is vital to our clients. As already mentioned, I'm a board member of ABTA. I'm chairman of its UK Aviation Committee, and I also recently served on the National Connectivity Task Force, which was chaired by Lord Shipley. Our remit was to focus on regional connectivity and to the additional runway capacity being considered in the southeast of England. We concluded that air connectivity matters and can make an important contribution to the rebalancing of the UK economy. We produced a public report, and our findings, in addition with the statistical data from all the regions and nations of the UK, have been fed into the airports of commission, so we hope to get their final report in June. One myth I would like to dispel is that foreign travel by Northern Ireland citizens has a negative impact on the UK economy. Passengers spend a lot in the UK before they leave. The companies selling air travel, companies like my own, pay a lot in taxes in the UK. And 7% of all employment in Northern Ireland is supported by travel and tourism. More than 60,000 people in our region are dependent on a thriving travel and tourism sector for their livelihoods. Around a third of travel and tourism jobs are held by young people aged between 16 and 24, and that's compared to just 12% of jobs in the wider economy. Another point I would like to make, if possible, Northern Ireland attracts more than £208 million annually from international visitors, and around £440 million is brought into the area by domestic tourists. An estimate of £408 million is also injected into the regional economy from our local people travelling outbound. This is made up of what constitutes what they spend before they travel. It means that we have a collective contribution of around £1 billion every year into the tourism mix.
If I will, yep. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Chief Executive of Visit Belfast, which is a public-private sector partnership destination marketing organisation for Belfast, and we market Belfast as a city break and a conference destination. They are the two fastest growing elements of tourism, so my focus is purely about getting visitors into Belfast and into Northern Ireland. Our aspiration is that Belfast will be in the top 15 tourism cities as measured by ECM, European City Marketing Organisation, in the top 100 conference cities in the world as measured by ICA, International Conference and Congress Association, and in the top 5 UK cities for conferences by 2020. Belfast City Council have put a strategy out where the target is to grow tourism spend by 100% by 2020, and the Minister's target, the Government's target, is to achieve $1 billion tourism revenue by 2020. The simple fact of the matter is those figures and those aspirations will only be achieved if we increase the number of overseas visitors, people from GB and overseas. Our tourism is currently, as it is very well performed, or has performed very well, but is too dominant on local indigenous overnight stayers. We need to grow the off the island of Ireland visitors. It's as simple as that. And the only way that's going to happen is by increasing connectivity. And one of the drags on increasing connectivity, as we've just heard all morning, is the PD. This is a very simple argument from our perspective, which is that either we're serious about tourism or we're not. If we're serious about tourism, we take all the drags and all the burdens that make us uncompetitive, and we remove them, and we have the conviction of our ambition to actually focus on the prize, the size of the prize, and not just on the cost, which is what is this going to cost us in terms of block grant. When you look at the GDP, the contribution of tourism to GDP, to Scotland, to Wales and to the Republic of Ireland, we are clearly about 50% of that. That is the level and the scale of our ambition. If we were to achieve double-digit growth, we would probably create another 60,000 jobs in Northern Ireland. Those are the sort of figures that I think more emphasis should be put on in terms of what is the size of the prize, what is the benefit of this. So a good cost-benefit analysis. I think possibly there's been too much focus on the cost and not on the benefit. To give you an idea, we've had 150% growth in conferences in the last year. Belfast was voted last year as the #1 conference city in the UK. So these are aspirations and objectives that are not pie in the sky, but are actually based on practical evidence. And I also would believe that the focus on APD has been too singular. In itself, it will not deliver all of this, but when it's taken the round in terms of putting policies to support the tourism industry, well then there's APD, there's the route development, and then there's VAT. And those things need to be considered in the round and taken together. In that way, then we have a paradigm shift and we prioritise tourism and prioritise the growth of visitor numbers, and in particular out-of-state overnight staying visitors to Northern Ireland. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I represent the Hotel Federation. There are about 8,000 hotel beds in Northern Ireland, and I suppose what we're really about is people leaving their own home and coming and staying in hotels. However, we recognise that hotels are not a standalone product. You have to have a vibrant economy to support them. It's important that you have a good nighttime economy. We see access as a key issue. When we look around, we see a business climate that is pretty unfavourable in comparison to other regions. And when I look at the figures from the Irish Republic, and if you put this in context, we had 243,000 visitors from Europe in 2013. The Irish Republic had 10 times that number, which is 2,463. And there's not any rocket science involved in this. It simply is that it's a better connectivity. We're a short break destination. We're an island. We have certain things here, and we've spent a vast amount of money creating a number of unique products, which people can only see in Northern Ireland. All of you represent different regions throughout the province, and tourism is something that can actually deliver to every single part of this region. When I look at the hotel figures, I see us sitting with about a 72% occupancy, which sounds really, really good. But in reality, what that means is that 28% of the time your room is empty. When I look to regional Northern Ireland, I see it had been about 66%, which is gradually falling away. And the only way for us to increase this is for us to get more visitors from overseas. I think there's no mistaking that the silo approach to tax does not work. If you look at APD, corporation tax, tax regimes see themselves in competition with each other. They're simply not. This is like, as I always say, giving somebody a box of chocolates and say only choose one. It's pretty difficult to do. We've got to develop a business climate that works. Tourism also is not something that's a standalone. Every hotel supports laundry, food service business, transport, visitor attractions. There's a wide range of industries that can be approached. We also would like people to realise that the type of tourism that we're looking for is different. We would like to hold on to our domestic tourist visitors. When I actually look at the breakdown, 60% of people who are visiting here are from the island of Ireland, which is a massive, massive figure. If you add GB on top of that, we're only getting about just under 10% actually, from further afield. And when I look at the figures, it is quite disturbing for us that we need to grow this. This is a pie for us that needs to grow. We've spent a vast amount of money getting product which is superb. You know, we've Titanic Belfast, we've the visitor centre in the Giant's Causeway. Derry has had a major facelift. The only way for us to sustain that is for us to get visitors from new destinations, and also, as Jerry says, to attract the business visitor. We need to become somewhere that's suitable for conferences, longer haul conferences from Europe, and without connectivity, we are not going to be able to do that. If you're a short break destination, you'll come for 3-4 nights and you'll leave again. When I look to long haul, I see sort of the difference. We actually get more visitors from Australia than we get from Germany, which is an incredible figure when you think of it. And it's, you know, when we look at those figures, we despair because we think, how is this ever going to change? And I am in agreement with things that other people have said today. We need to look at an overall economic future study of Northern Ireland, particularly in the tourism sector, to see how we are going to produce a business climate that actually supports this industry and allows us to grow. To put it a good figure is we'll probably have 10 million visitors to the island of Ireland this year. 9 million of those people will come in through Dublin. And they will have all the advantages to that, plus the fact we will have a large amount of people leaving here going out of Dublin Airport, which is a bit of a whammy as well. But from our point of view, 9 million people coming into Dublin Airport is a huge, huge commercial and economic advantage. And we would like to see us get a better share of that cake.
How concerned are you that things could get worse? I'm just looking at the map in terms of the different areas, percentage of GDP, 1.5 billion for the north. I mean, I would say with the abolition in the south, with the potential transfer of APD to Scotland and the reduction and eventual abolition there, then we become less competitive, and therefore this could get worse.
Chairman, you just said, you've answered your question. That's simply it. This isn't a nice to do sort of thing. The rest of the world has just gone on. We've got to catch up here. We mustn't forget, we're coming from a low base. We're trying to catch up with all these other well-established tourism economies, and it doesn't take Einstein to work out, well, if that's what they're doing and they're successful, well then we need to be doing the same thing. And you know, we've probably saturated, maybe not saturated the domestic percentage in terms of our tourism. The only growth that we're going to get, or the only significant fast growth now, is off the island of Ireland, and that's GB and that's Europe. Your previous delegation were talking about Germany and European source markets, and that's where we've got, and we've a fantastic story to tell. Janice has alluded to, we've got truly iconic visitor attractions. We've got a state-of-the-art conference facility. We have all the kit now. We just need to go and tell the story, but we need people to be able to get here, and that's about two things: route development and APD parity.
Which is more important, just out of interest, is it the short-haul European routes or the short-haul routes to Britain? In terms of, I mean, if there is a decision to be made in APD and there's differentiation between the two, which is more important in terms of economic growth?
It's not an either-or.
Yeah.
If you look at the figures from Great Britain, we get roughly about 1.2 million visitors from Britain in 2013. If you look into the Irish Republic, they get 3.1. So we basically get a third, which is about the right, which is not bad. We've actually quite good connectivity to GB, a lot of which is business-led. But it's not a question, it's a question of choice. And I think looking at APD, on the long-haul market, it was great that the flight was saved. The real disappointment is we could have had a direct route to the Middle East if it had been quicker. Dublin now have 28 flights a week to the Middle East, which gives you huge connectivity to markets, gives you huge connectivity to Asia, huge connectivity to New Zealand, Australia, China, places that people do. Titanic is a huge thing in China, and APD and long haul has more or less been sorted out, but it's not a choice of do we do Britain or do we do GB. In the south, they made a very clever decision. They went to €3. They reduced it to €3. They were kept it at €3, and then they went back and said, if this works and you promise us more routes, we will abolish this. And they simply doubled their capacity. They filled a complete terminal, and everybody said that it would be the ruination of the regional airports. Shannon has more flights this year than it's had for a large number of years. It's back on direct American routes. Cork has actually grown its numbers as well, so it has advantages for everybody. But it's not a choice of we'll do one and we won't do the other. Don't forget that Dublin is also bleeding routes from Manchester and London. You can effectively come to Aer Lingus are going on a daytime flight to the States, so that you can be there in the morning to start your day's business in the States. They're actually going to leave Dublin early in the morning, so you can do a full day's business in the States. And they've been very clever about how this has actually been adapted. It's been adapted for a range of markets. And the business traveller is a lucrative traveller. It's a traveller that you'd like to get through here. Aer Lingus are hubbing people through Manchester and through London and out through Dublin. They're hubbing people from the States back into Dublin and out into mainland Europe. And people think that that business doesn't bring you money, but it does. It gets people through your airports, it supports your airline staff, it supports you in terms of airport charges.
If I may, just to follow on from Janice, you're right, it's not an either-or. GB is the lifeblood currently in terms of overnight stays to Belfast. It's by far the biggest market share, and you cannot reduce that at all. But in terms of the growth, our aspiration of hitting $1 billion by 2020 of Dublin tourism revenue, if we're serious about it, where that growth is going to come from is short-haul Europe. To give you, Belfast, Northern Ireland has about 5% of the connectivity that Dublin has in terms of mainland Europe. That shows the scale of where we are. And the guys said earlier they don't need mass coverage across Europe. You can be very strategic in terms of the big source markets. Germany's one, Northern Italy's another. And you can have the added value that we're all looking for in terms of the long haul. Go into cities and airports that have the connectivity into the long haul as well. So it can be very cleverly done. But in the first instance, in terms of accelerating the growth of tourism that we all want, we've got to get better connectivity into Europe and do it very quickly. And that's why that route development fund is APD, and that together gives the government their hands on the lever of actually giving us a fighting chance to grow tourism.
If I might add as well, I had to commission some research into the value of leisure aviation, and that took on board that the mix of an aircraft is not just business travellers or leisure travellers, but it needs that whole mix to bring tourists in and take people out to be it viable for airlines to make profit on it. And if it's a traditional carrier where they can actually carry cargo in the belly hold, then that is a bigger bonus for us as well and will help our inward investment. So we need to be looking at the whole mix rather than just picking and choosing whether it should be a sun destination or a city destination. We need to bring tourists in here no matter what part of the world they come from.
Sorry, Joanne, I hate to be... our preference would be, it wouldn't be a sun destination, you know.
No,
clearly,
I understand.
Exactly, there's no need for... and from our perspective, there's no need for any more connectivity to Alicantes or whatever it is around about source markets coming in here that happen to be source markets for FDI and foreign direct investment as
But
well.
what I'm saying is don't write them off, include them in the mix because there is a value.
Believe it or not, for people from Spain, the fact that it's rains and it's cooler here in the summer is a big selling point. It might sound quite strange, you know, they don't necessarily wish to have a better tan. They're quite content the way they are. It's a 50-50, you know, the United Route's a really good example. The United Route sort of sits 45-55% depending on when you look at it. Ideally, you need your plane filled both ways. You can't just have it a one-way destination. We need routes that are sustainable. And, you know, going to Alicante is lovely over the summer, but in the winter time, you know, the airlines come off the route, so we just need... That's not to say those things aren't important, but from our point of view, we want people to come here, visit and stay.
Another way, Chairman, of viewing this as well, and the connectivity thing is, you know, as Janice said, we've invested so much in Titanic Belfast, Jan's Causeway in Derry, and the extension of the Waterfront Hall. We need to exploit that investment, and the only way we are the quickest, fastest way to get a return on that investment to give us connectivity to the markets where we can get conferences, international conferences, and we can get European short breaks here who want to come and experience that, and that is. It's almost like once we've done that investment, how do we exploit it then? Okay, so that's one way of looking at PD and route development.
In terms of Germany then, what is the potential to grow?
Germany is the largest, GB in Germany, the largest outbound short break destinations in Europe.
Germany had 557,000 visitors to the Irish Republic last year. We had 50,000. So Germany is the biggest travelling market. It's quite a traditional market, and it's a good market for us because Germans, the younger German likes to look at cities, so quite into sort of the city vibe, but there's a big tendency in Germany to go to look for, and there's a German word for it which I will not bore you with my dreadful German, which really means nothingness. And they like to go to places and stand and look at mountains and see, you know, really see wide open spaces. The Germans also have 37 days holidays per year. So they take more than one break, and they will come somewhere and they will stay. Some Germans will stay for a longer period of time. And from our point of view, we see Germany as a good market for business as well. There's a lot of companies here have direct links to German manufacturing companies, particularly in the airline industry. Germany would be a good route development for us. There's probably 2 or 3, I mean, this has been talked of for probably the last 8 to 10 years. There's talks about 2 to 3 different German routes coming on board. But the figures are there. I mean, there was 557,000 Germans came to the south last year, and we got 10% of that.
German Airline has been in Belfast in the last couple of months looking at the potential of bringing routes in. They weren't entirely sure which cities in Germany would be the best to serve. They serve the whole of the country. And I think perhaps maybe we should be doing more to encourage them to come over and help decide what we want as a destination, rather than them just sort of sticking pins in a map and saying, well, we'll try that. We need to be some sort of joint up conversation, and I think government should be involved in that as well as the airports and the airlines.
Michaela?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just very interesting listening there. Just in terms of how you market your feeder routes, I'd just be interested to know that. You know, I mean, You talked, Jerry, about your Titanic corridor and the causeway, and Janice, you mentioned about the Germans looking for the wide open spaces. So I'm just in terms of like the likes of the Sperrins, how that would be marketed as a feeder route from the causeway coast up to the Sperrins, or from Belfast to the Sperrins route. You know, is that? I mean, obviously, hopefully, you're doing that, and how is that being done?
Currently, the island of Ireland is marketed as one destination. In all overseas routes. So we are faced with an opportunity, we are faced with a situation where we are marketed along with the South in terms of everything. We're sitting with a tax regime which is different, a currency which is different, an APD which is different. All of those are currently in a disadvantaged state. When you look at the advertisement for the north of Ireland, it shows a large amount of that, meeting the people. It shows, you know, coming in through gateways, driving along the coastlines. And that has been very much put forward. There is a connectivity within the market. If you take, for example, the route from Dublin, a number of people now have discovered that they want to get to Belfast at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They don't necessarily want to arrive in Belfast at 9 in the morning if they're on a tour, or 12. So we've actually come up with an idea of them going through the Slieve Gullion area, driving through it, looking at it, coming out, then maybe going the more coastal route. And that's in talking directly with the big tour operators who are bringing people to the north for maybe 1 or 2 nights, but they maybe have planned to go to Titanic Belfast at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you've got, and then when they leave, they may want to head to the Wild Atlantic Way. So the answer is to send them down the Causeway coast, maybe in through the Sperrins, send them to Derry, and then they go on to the next part. But, you know, this is not a stand-alone. You've got to market your whole... Northern Ireland has a wide range of attractions. Some of them are city-based and some of them aren't. And different markets will like different things. And I think it's important for us to understand that there's a lot of things here that we don't see. I mean, I was in the Giant's Causeway on the 20th of March, and there were 8 buses from McCombs there with people, and it wasn't high season. And they were bringing people the whole way round and taking them on further to other destinations. So I think we try and market in a joined-up approach, but you've got to be aware of some things are simply a city attractions and other things are a rural attraction. Germans do like a rural product, but they may not.
It's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody.
But 35% of all people that stay overnight in Belfast visit other destinations. When we're selling Belfast as a conference destination, for example, big attraction is its gateway to our natural resource-based tourism. When the cruise ships come in, for example, the vast majority of them are going to other places as well. So selling Belfast as a city break and conference destination is not an either-or. It definitely does increase the footfall into other areas, including the Sperrins.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Just to follow on from that point, I mean, what potential is there to increase cooperation for mutual benefit between the North and Donegal as well? Because obviously Donegal is very well established, but when we're talking about APD, if we can get more people going through Belfast to go to Donegal as opposed to Dublin, and that benefits everybody because it's closer than Dublin.
Absolutely. I wouldn't be the expert on that in terms of I'm sure the airports would be able to give you that, but certainly it makes common sense that Donegal is not closer to Derry International and Belfast Airport than trying to drive through the country down to Dublin. And if it was a parity of steam in terms of cost, then I'm sure they would. And certainly Belfast is a good gateway to Donegal, as well as an exit point for the Donegal population. So absolutely, you know.
But you can get from Donegal to Dublin Airport, I think 6 times a day, in about 3 hours and 20 minutes, in a direct bus route. Just as you can get to Dublin Airport from Belfast 24 hours a day at this stage. The journey runs right through the night. And if we had more routes, we could certainly attract people from Donegal both ways, out and in. and it would be, Donegal has a small airport which is supported by a regional fund, and it is a direct flight every day to Dublin. But a lot of it is not used necessarily for connectivity. They need to give you the figures themselves. My understanding is it's a feeder airport for business into Dublin, as opposed to being a feeder airport for international routes. It's in the morning and it comes back in the evening, but it's very heavily supported. But cross-border things, I mean, the Wild Atlantic Way has been the success story of Irish tourism over the last year. And it's a coast that runs from Donegal, from Mallinhead to Missenhead is basically what it is. We have an opportunity to have an entire coastal experience. People talk about the Big Sur in California. Big Sur in California is lovely, but it's probably not as dramatic as the Causeway Coast. It's probably not as dramatic as the Mourne Drive. And we have an opportunity to join those things up, but you've got to get people into your destination. And if people have most people in modern times are time poor. It's one big thing people say, I'm very time poor. People want to go away for 3 days. So if you can get them into you for 3 days and they do 3 things and you're here, you've won. And they go back and they tell, I think the figure is 15 people, and those 15 people tell another 15 people. So the problem is we've got to get more people in here directly. And Dublin in some ways is a gateway for us, but it also is a big threat. And we have seen that we are not growing. I mean, our actual numbers from Europe are falling. They are not actually growing.
I had a conversation last week with City of Derry Airport, and they advised me that 34% of their departing passengers originate from Donegal. If that's any help to you.
What was that, sorry?
34% of their departing passengers are from Donegal.
They put on a sun route every summer. They put on 2 or 3 sun routes. They put on I think it's Faro, Malaga, and they do attract people, through that way, and it has worked well for them, and it's a good policy where, people, particularly families who have small children, don't necessarily want to travel to a larger city hub. They'll come from Donegal. I speak from experience, and that members of my family have used this. And it works well, and that's a market that they have deployed quite cleverly. I think they've had, every year they've picked a destination and they've rotated them. I think it was Lanzarote last summer. So,
John?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, certainly again some fairly stark figures. I think the ones that left out were 10 million people to the island of Ireland and 9 million coming through Dublin.
That'll be the estimate. You take last year, there were about 7,600 people came into the Irish Republic, according to Fáilte Ireland. Now, we're sitting in the embarrassing situation where it is now, to the best of my knowledge, April 2015. The figures from the south are out. They're able to tell you how many visitors they had and where they came from. We do not have those figures. We will not have those figures until May of this year. So therefore, you are 5 months into the year and you don't know where your visitors from last year came from. So if you want to make any plans, how are you going to do that? I have the figures for the first 9 months of last year, which would show probably another year of consolidation as opposed to a year of growth. When I look at the south and I see their figures, I just see them going one way. And that's been the way for the last, since 2011. But I'm taking that as, even if we've 9 million visitors, 8 million of them are going to come through Dublin.
That's way out of kilter. But
well, if you think, if you were even to take it in terms of, putting politics and division, if you were even to take it in terms of the 9 counties of Ulster, you would expect you to have probably about a third to a quarter, which would be a reasonable assumption.
A bit more like your figures of visitors from GB are relatively proportioned to
If you take 1.3 million visitors from North America coming into Dublin, and you take 165,000 visitors from North America coming into Northern Ireland, and they are, that's your. Also, America now has become a short-haul market, believe it or not. A lot of young Americans are prepared to travel for 4 days. They're prepared to leave on a Thursday evening. And a lot of the higher spend people, I've travelled quite a bit to the States. You'll meet golfers who are coming in on a Thursday evening. They've left Wall Street or whatever it is. These are just the people I met. Left Wall Street on a Thursday evening after work, got the 9 o'clock flight. We're flying to Northern Ireland to play 4 courses in Northern Ireland and flying back on Sunday evening.
I suppose, John, just picking up your point, with 50% of the seats to GB that the Republic has, and we're doing okay with our percentage-wise. We've only 3% of the seats to North America that the Republic has, and we're underperforming there. We've only 5% of the seats to mainland Europe that the Republic has, and we're underperforming there. So clearly, what we need to do is increase our route connectivity, and then we have a better chance of getting what we would perceive to be our fair share of those source markets.
I mean, Chair, the bit I'm very interested in seeing a point you'd made as well, John, around the silo mentality about tax, and probably ties in, about how you develop this entire package about tourism. It's not just about getting people here, it's having something for them to do, something that interests them, that will appeal to different markets, from whether it's the Germans that want to walk or any type of hill ramblers or walkers, whatever, to other sightseers, or to whatever the activity happens to be, or coming here to get into a cooler climate and a bit of rain. And that, I suppose, when I was talking to the airport guys, was about looking at tax and devolving tax much more as a commission to look at what is the best things that we need to look at. Is it just corporation tax in a zone? Is it APD? Is it both? Is it VAT? What is it we do need to change and to build up in the regional economy and build up a complete tourist package? Because you're going to have all of those things, because you're representing, coming at this from slightly different places. When you're going to see very much getting people here, then it's the amount of tax we charge on tourism and hospitality compared to the south, and we're not able to respond to those things almost quickly enough to compete with our nearest neighbour.
But I think you've got to look at this as an economic question. It's an economic question for Northern Ireland. It's not simply a tourism question. This is where you see yourself positioned in 2030, or 2020 is too close because it's only 5 years away. But this is where you see yourself in 2030. And, you've got to look at what type of an economic structure do you want this region to have, coupled with the changing political and the changing socio-economic climate. You've got to put that all together. We believe that tourism has the ability to deliver a significant amount of change, and a change that isn't just in one small slice of the economy. It can actually spread. We've spent a huge amount of money developing things. We're now in a sort of a prime position. We have a lot of things going for us, but it's just slight adjustments to thinking, and some of that I hasten to add is Westminster thinking as much as it is the Assembly thinking. And I would certainly say that a lot of this is job focused, and that's certainly where a lot of the changes came in the South. The changes came in the South around their 2011 kind of pre-budget thing, where they actually looked at the job model. And I think that looking at things, even looking at as tax as a single issue, is not enough. You've got to look at the tax element of it, the transport infrastructure of it, the skills part of it, the cohesive, how you're bringing people together. And this is our concern, is that sometimes things are seen just in a one kind of, for example, we have great food, we have fantastic food in Northern Ireland. Everybody that comes here, when they leave, they're always shocked by how good the food is, equally shocked by the size of the portion that they get, but generally shocked by the actual how good the food is. So you have a great food agri-business which you can join with your tourism business, and then you can join with your export business. If you go to London, I would say probably 20 of the top Michelin star restaurants in London are serving Irish beef, because they see it as a premium grass-fed product. That's the key element to it. So I think the argument or the concern we have is that tourism needs to be seen as a great economic driver, and the actual climate to grow that needs to change. And that's not alone about APD. APD is part of that puzzle. Scotland are looking at it. They're not looking at it for the good of their health. They're sitting with a tourism product that is currently 7 times the size of our product. They're sitting with an agri-food business where I think a bottle of whiskey, one bottle of Scotch whiskey is sold some incredible, one every 30 seconds or some incredible figure. I don't know the exact figure. But they have actually seen that joining those two figures together, they have tourism as a key driver for their economy. And that's what we need to have. We need to actually see tourism as something that can deliver for every constituency within this region, not just, it's not a competition. Ballycastle is not in competition with Bangor. Strabane is not in competition with Strangford. There are advantages for everybody. If you're going from Derry, you have to drive through Strabane to get to other places. There's one hotel in Strabane that does very well. Every town needs some form of an infrastructure. And I think that's the bigger question for us as a region. I think we're very inclined to look at things as a standalone. I realise some of this is not within your gift, but I think all of you have connections into Westminster, and I think it's very important for regions, and I think Scotland has completely twigged this, that for them tourism is something that can bring in, this is an export. 723 million quid came in here last year, 418 from overseas, and it's a great thing. It's a real export business.
I mean, you've touched on a lot of themes and issues there, Janice. I mean, and I take it, and you mentioned my constituency obviously covers Mourne Mountains, and it's getting even the rates of spend per night that we have are way below the equivalent in ROI or GB. Food product, one complaint that I get from a friend that lives in London is he can buy Northern Irish product easier in London than he can buy it in Northern Ireland, which I find bizarre. If you look at our figures from our agri-food sector, which is our largest private sector, they're way below what they're doing in the Republic as well. We're not performing as well as we should, so I certainly take the point, it is not about looking at and that's why I was interested in that, and more around that silo approach to just saying, right, we fix this and that'll sort everything out, that you need to build in a much broader package. Life
is about supply and demand. Paris is the most expensive city in Europe to go to, probably. It's the most expensive hotel destination. People are prepared to pay €10 to sit and have a cup of coffee on the Champs-Élysées because it is the Champs-Élysées. My argument is, we film Game of Thrones here. There's only one place you can go to Westeros, I think it is, and that's by coming here. It's not just about the cost, it's about supply and demand. If Belfast is full, you get waves of people going out. If Derry is full as a city, you get waves of people moving out. And it's that ripple effect that people need to understand. You've also got to be clever about the type of tourism you attract. We do not want to be, and I don't really want to mention any destinations, but you do not want to be a 10 weekend, a low budget destination, because many destinations have tried that. We want to be a higher end destination which attracts people who are looking for a range of products that they are prepared to pay for. The biggest problem we have is actually we are not particularly good at extracting money from people. The extraction of money is, a very, very important element of a tourism product. And I'm not talking about ripping people off, I'm talking about giving people the opportunity to buy something that they want when they are here, be it a cup of coffee, a photograph, or whatever it is.
I don't think we're all good at sometimes recognising what we have, and we tend to almost downplay it too much and say, well, why would... I mean, I've been in Paris for a weekend. No, it's incredibly expensive. But I look even at holidaying in Scotland, it's much better geared up for tourist signs, things to do, activities, what might interest you. We're not good at tapping into some of that.
That is because Scotland have seen it as a driver. And they have, bypassed the rules. I've seen the rules being bypassed. It's, we'll do this, let's move this forward. I mean, people have been clever about doing these things. And I understand we've had a difficult start to this. We've had, there's a lot of things that have happened here that have made it significantly challenged. But we now sort of sit on the cusp of having the opportunity to grow this. And it's not about building lots more attractions. It's about managing the assets that you have and being very specific in the markets that you want to go to, and helping the agencies that you are giving money to maximise that. You know, you're giving a lot of money to agencies who are really at this moment in time operating with one hand tied behind their back. You know, you're going out into, like, I go to America, so you're going out into the States and you're operating in a sort of system where we are behind the door because we don't have the same actual climate and even in business sense we don't have. And that's why I say tourism and hospitality ties directly into business. You're not going to get the world's leading law firm here if that guy's partner's wife can't find a nice restaurant to go to and they can't find a good school to send their children to. So you've got to look at it as an overall package, and we think we've something to offer, and it would be important that maybe that was looked at a little longer.
Chairman, just to add that, I think, John, you mentioned it, you know, maybe we don't have belief in ourselves or the confidence, and surely the last 5 years have shown the growth in tourism, that when we've got the marketing right, when we've got the access right, it works. So in terms of APD, maybe a focus on the size of the prize and what it could do, and a bit more confidence that with a step and a leap, because no matter what analysis and programming you do, ultimately you're looking into the future. But we would certainly, from a tourism perspective, is take these handcuffs off. Surely we've proven that we can attract people to Belfast and the rest of Northern Ireland, and the returns that brings. And so it is a confidence issue that if we take the restrictions from us, we can certainly perform as well as our neighbours down south and in Scotland and Wales. I suppose that would be the summary of it from our perspective from Visit Belfast anyway, Chairman.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, John. Any other members? Okay. Thank you all very much.
Cheers,
all right.
Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, members, can I seek agreement to copy all the papers from the previous two sessions to the Department and for comment in advance of a future session on the 13th of May? Agreed. Can I also seek agreement to notify the ETI Committee of today's evidence given the shared interest in the issue?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay. Correspondence, yeah?
There's just 3 items of correspondence, Chair. I think 2 maybe require decisions. The first is at page 117. Michaela had asked for this to be included in correspondence. It's a member of the public writing regarding a apparent delay in a pay increase for the education sector, and seems to be suggesting that DFP may have some involvement in terms of business case approval. So it's just really to...
Yeah, it's just, it's just basically, I mean, this has been sent to every MLA, and rather than ignore it, just to find out where this agreement is at the minute. And I do know that a business case against the pay rise was agreed at central government level, but just to find out where it's at, basically. I mean, it's a 2.2% pay rise. I don't know if they're going to get it, but the author of the letter has quite rightly said that the council workers has got their pay rise, and where's their pay rise at? If they don't get it now, they could be waiting another year or more for it. So it's just to find out where it's at the minute.
So it's not a matter really for the Department, Education Minister himself? Ask him would be quicker.
Yeah. Wherever it needs to be.
So it refers to the Department of Finance in the correspondence as well in terms of business case. But
Sure, to cover all bases would make sense, A, to refer it on, but also, I know we can't, it's a breach of protocol for us to write the Department of Education, forward on to the Education Committee as well for their sensible.
Yeah.
And then there's correspondence at page, the bag of table papers from the Law Commission in respect of defamation, review of defamation law. The members will recall that the last time the Law Commission were up, they indicated that they would provide the summary of submissions to the consultation, and Ken Miller, who is interim chief executive, is just writing to explain that that summary, which won't include recommendations, but it'll be a summary or commentary, and the responses will be provided to the department. So it's just really to check if the committee want to write to the department to seek a copy of that when it's available in terms of next steps.
Great.
Fair enough. That's all the correspondence.
Okay, committee work programme is at pages 122 to 126 of your packs. Any other business from members? One issue I just want to raise, there's been some concerns from certain businesses about Cerberus and how some of the portfolios that have been passed on from NAMA are being held. So I was going to suggest that we correspond with Cerberus, given that they continue to liaise with the Department of Finance and Personnel on a number of issues, see if we can get any kind of briefing, not on individual cases, but in a general sense, in terms of the impact of the local economy. Right. Okay, next meeting is Wednesday, 29th of April at 10 a.m.
30. This is the Northern Ireland